Hello, beautiful people. I'm back again for day 7 of Earth University. Back at doing a night video from where I used to play sports as a kid, the Civic Center, about 5 minutes from my parents' house. Spent a lot of time here when I was younger. So yeah, I'm give a quick update on what I got going on Facebook with the writing and the post. So I uploaded 2 more of my paintings. One that I actually started on about 1.5 years ago and recently finished up over the weekend when I got the urge to pick it back up. It felt like the right time to finish it. It's called In Gold We Trust. It's going to certainly tie into the topic for tonight. And then the other one is a phoenix that's rising called Forged in Fire. And I have a fun article that I posted along with that. Part of how I tell my story and heal and process things is that some of the stuff just is so outrageous that I've found out has actually occurred, that simply just telling what I believe happened, I shouldn't even say believe, like I know it happened. I realize that I can say that stuff until I'm blue in the face, and it's going to have minimal effect. But at the very least, I can process it, have fun with it. I've talked before about making light of heavy situations, so kind of using my imagination and having fun with it and turning it into something that has some entertainment value, but also gets people to maybe think about the things that I'm saying a little bit more as they continue to read my stuff. Hopefully, at some point, there'll be some action on investigating or bringing some sort of justice to me for basically getting my life taken from me, trying to get me to forget and be controlled by one person after the next my entire life. It just is the lengths that people have gone through, and I've gotten some downloads or messages from the higher powers. Whenever I start to, even for a second, doubt that, listen, I was asleep and unaware of the extent of my story. I felt something was just off my entire life, but to have dreamed up, even with the vivid imagination that I have, to dream up the story of what truly occurred throughout my life, even I couldn't have believed a lot of this stuff. So there has been seconds of doubt that have crept in throughout the course of this, where I say, like, that just sounds too bizarre, and like, would people really do that? And whenever I start to have those little slight seconds that I allow myself to think that way, I'll get a nudge from above, and it will be like, not only did that stuff happen, it's way worse than I even imagined. Like, they haven't even shared certain things. Like, I haven't fully remembered the extent of what's occurred. But it's surreal to still continue to interact with some of these people that were involved, or at least who know my story, know the things that I'm saying are true. It does really go back to like why the Truman Show resonated so deeply with me. Just the idea that I've looked so many people dead in their eyes, which they were trying to avoid eye contact with me, and I asked them certain things, important things that it reminds me of the scene with Truman and his best friend in the movie when he flat out asked him, and he said, "Would I lie to you?" You could take it two different ways. Like, Truman's reaction could be one of like ultimate disappointment because he already knew the whole time, or the even sadder reality is that like he still has that internal struggle of if the things that he knows, like he knows, but I don't know if he fully knew at that point or not. My feeling is, just like myself, he knew when his mom was showing him the photos and stuff in the album that he knew she was lying, and that he knew his best friend was lying, and all the other things he noticed. Like, the movie for the most part was him probably, like myself, hoping that somebody at some point will actually be a human being and step up and like say something that they know. But I've gotten to the point that doesn't really matter. I'm very much used to fighting this battle that I didn't ask for on my own. Continue to put in the hard work, and despite all of the shenanigans that are still occurring in the background, you know, there's a lot of things that I claimed when I first came on here about that at the time, because they came out of nowhere, seemingly, like, you guys probably thought I was crazy, but there hasn't been one thing that I have put out there that I have ever taken back. I know all of the things that I've claimed they tried to do. Like, I got confirmation, I have evidence of those claims. There's so much more that I have actually avoided speaking about. One of them being, I just find this to be an odd thing, because I know that there's some important documents that are meant for me, meant to be delivered to me, something that I'm supposed to receive that's good news through the mail. But that's the funny thing. It's been almost a year now since I got evicted from my apartment. Yet, strategically, just to see what people were going to do, because obviously I didn't leave on great terms with my landlord, since, he was involved in all of this and basically went against his word and then tried to extort me for more money and left me scrambling to get myself moved out of the apartment, as I had all this other stuff happening around me at the same time. But yeah, I never changed my mailing address from that residence. I find it odd that the landlord wouldn't say, why is your mail still coming to this address? If I was the landlord, I think any reasonable person who was a landlord, because we shared a mailbox. I didn't have a separate mailbox. So my mail would go to the same place that their mail went. Wouldn't you think at some point that you wouldn't want somebody's mail just being delivered to your house if they weren't even living there? That just seems like a common sense type thing for me. So the fact that he didn't reach out says a lot to me, that certainly he was involved and was trying to avoid me at all costs. And two, I'd be willing to bet that somebody rerouted my mail and made sure I didn't get the thing that was supposed to come my way. So, on top of all the other allegations that I've said a million times, that's tampering with somebody else's mail, opening somebody else's mail, pretty sure is a federal crime. That's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, that's just one of many crimes that have been committed. But Tom, if you're watching, or anybody else has a good explanation of where my mail's been for the last year, I would be interested in hearing that story. Sounds like it'll be a real fairy tale, a nice lie that you guys make up in your imaginations of what happened to it. It's not normal. Do you guys think I just decided not to forward my mail? That I wouldn't notice that I didn't get my mail for a year? You really think I wasn't 100% aware that you guys were going to tamper with it? It's crazy to me that you guys can just be so bold with this stuff and take me for a complete, like I'm walking around blind to the world. Like I'm a fully functioning 42-year-old adult man. I've received mail my whole life. I understand that there's a thing called the U.S. Postal Service that delivers envelopes and packages to people. You think I just forgot about mail? But I'm sure you guys covered your tracks so they can't be traced back to whoever intercepted what was supposed to be delivered. But regardless, honestly, there's some other things that, when I do the stories in the way that I do them, I purposely blur the line between like being serious and just joking around with things. I make jokes, but like the things that I say are also true. Like the claims that I'm making in there, as ridiculous as they sound sometimes, the underlying truth is still there. So tonight I'm going to talk about the U.S. over the last 100 or so years, talk about some figures that played a part in both industry and making the country the way that it is now, and then also on the media side and propaganda and mind control. Talk about CIA and MK Ultra and those things. But I'm fascinated with the mind myself. It's why I think I'm as qualified as I am to be playing this role, is because I've always had a fascination with the human mind and studying it. So I'm going to tell a quick story about talking to my daughter again tonight. Clearly wasn't herself when she called. And for 10 or 15 minutes, she really was just giving me one-word answers. And she had swim coming up. So I was like, is anything wrong? You're not being yourself. And she really just wasn't being all that talkative, which is unlike her. But my ex-wife is always close by when I'm talking to Riley, so she's always listening in and listening to what Riley says. So I'm like, do you want to go, eat dinner, get ready for swim? We don't have to talk if you don't want to talk. Like, you just seem like something's wrong. And, I grew up not only not being encouraged to talk about my emotions or how I felt. Turns out that was for a reason. Like, I was supposed to forget and not work through my feelings, because if I did that and was healthy in processing my emotions, that maybe some of these things that I was supposed to forget would come back to me. And clearly I've talked about mental illness, and specifically like narcissistic personality disorder and the other cluster B personalities and personality types or disorders. And how, like, I understand that it's almost, that's the generational curses. And her, Riley's mom, and this isn't me just picking on her, because like I said, I get it. Like, it was the household she grew up in, the way that she was raised. Her parents they don't know how to process their emotions. They don't know how to regulate their emotions. Like, being able to speak about them isn't something that was ever encouraged. So that's what leads to those disorders to develop in the next generation, because they get passed down. They attribute material things as having the value, and they detach from like that love that they never actually got. So I just see like Riley clearly being uncomfortable, because I was encouraging her to talk to me about what was wrong. And she clearly didn't want to hang up the phone, but she kept looking over to my ex-wife, and it felt to me like she didn't want to talk about something specifically, like that might or may not be bothering her. But she just started to like cry and said she didn't know what was wrong. So I was like, I started asking her if anything happened or went wrong in school. And it just reminding her and encouraging her that she can talk to me about anything, that, like, it's a healthy thing and a good thing to talk about your emotions. And like, what are you feeling right now? So she said she was sad, but she didn't know why. So I said to her, you know what I used to do when I was sad? like I used to pet the dogs. And she said to me, what do you do now? Because I'm not with the dogs. And I said, Daddy likes to either write or paint. That's how he kind of processes his emotions and deals with his feelings. Like he addresses them through, I've talked about alchemy and transmuting through those different avenues. So as soon as I said that I paint to work through my feelings, like she said, hold on, and then went and got an art project she was working on the other day, and then started to do that. And within like 2 minutes, she said, thank you, like that she felt better already. So I just want people to remember at the end of the day why I've decided to fight so hard for this cause, because it's not just about me. It's not just about my daughter, but about how this is the reality of so many situations that are playing out in our world, in our country, and how, unfortunately, the people who are doing the victimizing of others, that are tormenting other people, they will somehow, because they're charismatic and they're playing the part and the role, they'll somehow become the sympathetic figure in a lot of these stories, and they're actively trying to destroy somebody's life and wreak havoc. So like, yeah, a lot of people aren't going to be able to stay as composed as I have throughout this process. And unfortunately, that leads to them getting their kids taken away, or, lead them to getting put in prison on charges that were made up, or whatever the story is. It's the same idea behind it, is how quick people are to believe the appearances of what a situation looks like, but not fully have the ability or the knowledge or the awareness of what this stuff truly is, and how much damage it's done by allowing these rulings and things always seemingly going in their favor, and they even get sympathy from people, because usually the stories they make up, that this monster, in my case, me being the monster, all these horrible things that I apparently did, most of the time, it's really just the exact things that they did to the other person. Like, they just use the narrative and flip the roles. I talk a lot about how their playbook is not all that creative or original or innovative. They have a bag of tricks that they like to pull from. It's usually like, if you're going to stick with a lie, let's say, like, if you're going to run with a lie, it's pretty easy to remember the stuff that you did yourself. So that's what you say happened. You don't have to really remember too many details because you just switch roles. It's like putting your same birth date on a fake ID, just moving the year ahead so you don't have to remember your fake birthday. That's how I imagine they keep track of their stories. It's because it's actually things that they did to other people. And like I said last night, these are the people throughout our government, throughout the world, our leaders that we follow and applaud and give awards to. So I thought that was a good lead in to what I'm going to talk about. So when I was talking about Nikola Tesla, I mentioned JP Morgan and how he was the first billionaire and all the different companies that he owned, and how he backed Edison and Marconi in their inventions and things with electricity, because he owned General Electric. So I'm not going to talk about him too much more, but I wanted to lead off with him because he has a direct connection to the first figure that I want to talk about, who's the father of spin. So, or as like how they would want you to say it, the father of public relations. But let's be real about it. This guy was like, he understood how the human mind worked, and he manipulated and used that knowledge to feed propaganda and really negatively influence the decision-making of an entire country. So who am I talking about? It's Edward Bernays. Born 1891, died in 1995, so 104, pretty impressive. But he was Sigmund Freud's nephew. When I talked about Carl Jung, I had mentioned about Sigmund Freud, obviously one of the most famous psychologists of all time. So you would assume his nephew. He's a smart guy, likely studied, spoke to his uncle about the human mind and understood how it operates, similar to myself. I studied it and want to learn about it so that I can help educate other people and use it in a positive way. he didn't necessarily do the same. So he was criticized for manipulating public opinion, but you probably didn't hear a lot about that side of the equation, because he was also named as one of the 100 most influential people of the 20th century by Life magazine. So, yeah, obviously the guy had a significant impact on marketing and how to sell the things that these bigwigs, the conglomerates, the billionaires want you to buy. So one of his clients was General Electric, which is the tie-in to JP Morgan. So there's a few things that stick out to me. So he worked with General Electric, Procter and Gamble, then did stuff for the government. So yeah, the government's using this guy to push their agenda, propaganda, like pretty clear cut. But some of you might recall in the 20s, there's like a famous, I can't remember if it was a picture or if it was an actual like video reel, but there was like 4 or 5 women. This is, I think, 1929. So this is like right around women's rights and women's freedom to be able to live life the way they wanted, like the men. So it was a big deal when these 4 or 5 women were dressed in like cool hip clothing of 1929 and walking down the street all smoking cigarettes. It was Torches of Freedom. That was apparently I don't know if that was the name of the cigarette brand or the campaign, but regardless, it was a picture that was taken and then like passed around like it was an organic thing that they just so happened to snap a picture of these 4 or 5 young, cool, free women, and they're all smoking cigarettes. So if you want to be a cool, hip, free woman, that's a symbol. That's the cigarettes are torches of freedom. Now, I don't buy for a second that anyone that has anything to do with manufacturing cigarettes or doctors would think at any point that inhaling harsh smoke, tobacco smoke in your lungs is somehow good for you. Like, I think they've always known that it's detrimental to the health of somebody, which I'm all about personal freedom and rights. If you want to smoke, by all means, do you. But what I have a problem with is the blatant manipulation factor that goes into orchestrating an entire campaign and staging this photo shoot. And then I'm sure, you feed it to the papers, the tabloids or whatever, like you push that out there like this is just the natural scene, when they just created this false, it was an illusion of like what was actually going on. It was just a made up story, no different than the stories that I make up, just to sell something that causes, all this disease to the body and stuff, like just for profit of this one brand. You just go and create this lie. It was just, that's marketing, right? Like that's how we view it. It's just part of the game. It just feels so dirty to me, like that. If it happens like organically, then I have no problem. But the level of like that you have to go to think of it, of doing that, to get an entire new demographic and generation hooked on this thing that's not good for you. And he's applauded for it, named one of the most influential people, because that's the type of stuff that we celebrate. So the other notable one that I wanted to touch on about him is in the 1950s, he did a campaign for the United Fruit Company, which, for anybody who doesn't know that story, or the story of, the store in the mall, Banana Republic. Like, I don't know how all of a sudden that just is like a cool name to use for a clothing store, because if you actually know what it means, it's pretty disgraceful that the United States, basically overthrew the Guatemala president, or I don't know what they call the leader in Guatemala. I think it's president. But so this guy basically they have a lot of bananas that grow in Guatemala. There's a company, United Fruit Company, that was a big player in farming in the country. But this president wanted his own people who owned the farms and stuff to actually be able to farm their own land and make a living off of this crop. So they basically were denying the United Fruit Company certain rights to farm in the country, which this United Fruit Company from, our country, they had certain owners and investors in this company just so happened to be related to and have connections with the U.S. government. So, what do they do? You just overthrow this president and choose a person that they want to replace him, basically just taking away the freedom of the people of that country. And it became referred to as a banana republic, because this wasn't just a one-time thing that the United States government does. I mean, it was just like the narcissists and people I talk to, like, they typically go back to the same playbook. So anytime there was a country who, God forbid, didn't want foreign intervention and be told how to run their own country or what's best for their people, if the bottom line, the finances weren't positive for the United States or our government or our companies that are the donors and the people who fund the lobbyists and stuff who fund all these government officials, and I'm sure all the bribes and the money that passes hands. You scratch my back, I scratch yours, When somebody comes with a problem that they're having in another country doing commerce or, doing business in that country, why don't we just replace them and put somebody who's more United States friendly? Just forget about the people of that country's rights to govern themselves. Like I talked yesterday about Germany and invading other countries. It's a regular occurrence with this nation for sure. Just like my situation that I'm going through, the only difference is it's the doing it in the dark and dressing it up like it's something else. It's always a different story of why something's occurring, not the truth of what it's really just about is that a few men aren't making as much money as they want to make. So they say, well, let's do something about it without thinking of anybody else. So clearly they lack empathy for anybody but themselves in the decision making. But they're just given free rein to do this over and over again. And we just eat it up, buy it every time, thinking that, oh, well, that stuff's not still going on. Like, I talked about it the other day. What has occurred that makes you think that the state of the world has improved, that the morals and the things we are willing to do and not do has improved? I mean, to me, it's just seemingly has gotten significantly worse. But, you know, God forbid you make those claims, you end up being a crazy person or a conspiracy theorist, yet just fact after fact comes out that these things most certainly happen, and then a new one comes out. But as I'll show you guys, is that the people that control the businesses, the media, everything, the flow of information and the spin that gets put on this information, like they don't care if it comes out 20 years later, the truth. They already got away with the thing and made their money, and they're moved on to the next thing that they're doing that we don't know about yet. And we don't think that they're doing it. Like, give me a break. You really don't think that there's something wrong with BlackRock and Vanguard, and that you walk into a grocery store and 80% of the stuff on the shelves is literally like one of 2 or 3 companies that own that entire product. Like, and not only that product, but like they own so many different companies under their umbrella that virtually like everything we're buying is just going to make the same people wealthier and wealthier. It's the illusion of choice that we have selection. But is that really the case when it's the same company just giving you 4 different choices? It's just like I talked about how the railroad and all the stuff in the Industrial Revolution happened. You know, everybody loved these companies bringing jobs to these towns, but they just took off when they could make it somewhere else cheaper, or if technology got better and they don't need as much manpower anymore. The sad part is that everybody's so blind to not be able to see that they're setting us up right now to do the same thing on a much bigger scale. Like, artificial intelligence and the advancement of technology versus the advancement and the resources and money that they put into people versus technological innovation. Everybody's just happy that they get to work their 9 to 5 and get a paycheck now, not seeing the writing on the wall that these people aren't even people at a certain level because they lack empathy for other people. They don't care if it's a machine or a man. They just care that they're the ones that are getting rich off of it. So, part of my entire revolt against mainstream everything is the idea that any of us are safe in any job. The only way is figure it out on your own, like how you can provide something that people actually want to pay you for and that you can sustain and live and be happy doing. Because at any point, they could pull the rug out from under us. Like, widespread, just pull the rug out, and an entire country is like jobless, and they already own, BlackRock, like buying up all the real estate, the weather manipulation. Like, let's be honest, the stuff that happened in North Carolina, the weather, like the California fires that just conveniently, there's no water in the reservoirs. Like, California conveniently has plans to convert to a smart city. So, if that's the plan for 2030, they want to convert to a smart city, which I don't know if any of you actually know what that even means. I'll let you guys do a little homework. But it's funny, like, you could just destroy people's houses after, conveniently, like, insurance stopped wanting to insure certain properties that then got destroyed. And then who's there to buy them up when the people who lost their homes can't afford it? Like BlackRock and the other conglomerates that own the world. Like North Carolina has all of these resources. I think it's lithium, if I'm not mistaken, or quartz or something. There's something in North Carolina that just, there's no real logical explanation for the hurricane to take the route that it did and turn through the center of a state that wasn't on the coast and do that much damage. Like, doesn't make a ton of sense when you look at it from just think, like, it just doesn't make sense. And at this point, I don't buy any expert's explanation of anything, because it's proven time and time again that all experts mean is somebody willing to be controlled and say the thing that goes along with the narrative that they want you to say. There's plenty of people who are very smart and know about weather patterns who would strongly agree with me. There's a lot of people who know about how fires burn naturally versus when they get started by lasers and other things like that. And for anybody who doesn't think that weather manipulation is something that we can do, that technology has existed for a very long time. I'll have to look up exactly when. I can't off the top of my head remember, but yeah, there's patents and things that were filed for that stuff a very long time ago. Yet it just blows my mind that we're naive enough to think that these things are being worked on, that there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes that we're not told about. But then you can actually see proof that, like, these patents exist and this technology exists. And we see, like, how people act in this world and what people get away with for so long. I'll bring up again, like, Puff Daddy and Jeffrey Epstein. Like, just how do the people around those people not know what is going on? I'm sure there's some people on the outside that don't have the information and they keep it hidden, but, like, the only explanation is that there's way more people involved in it. That's why none of the stories ever truly come out. Everything's always convoluted because they just want to blur the lines. So we think it's these, it's like the JFK thing, just it's the solo shooter, just the lone gunman. Like, there's no way there's not so many people involved in both of the cases I just talked about. And sadly, if something doesn't change, nobody who's a victim in those cases are ever going to get any justice. Like, just smoke and mirrors over and over again. It's, at a certain point, it just gets to be a point that we have to say it's too much. There's power in numbers. That's been proven. At a certain point, if enough people are willing to demand something, no amount of money matters at that point. But apparently we're just willing to, as a society, shrug our shoulders and say, oh well. So let me real quickly talk MK Ultra. That was just the next thing that followed. So 1950s into the 60s, huge violation of individual rights, brainwashing and psychological torture. 1975, revealed to the public. So this is a thing that absolutely did happen. They had hearings about it, which just happened to be led by Nelson Rockefeller, which you might find that name familiar. So he was the vice president, but, obviously part of the Rockefeller family, one of the wealthiest men of all time, John D. Rockefeller, who owned Standard Oil, 90% of all production of oil. So basically a man who became the first billionaire. I don't know if I said JP Morgan was the first billionaire. If I did, that's a mistake. I think Rockefeller was the first one. So this guy basically was just the most brutal businessman who just was willing to do anything to crush his competition and create a monopoly that he owned everything. So he owned 90% of all oil production at one point, and eventually they did make him dissolve it, which he had to separate it into like 34 entities. But even still, if I recall my history correctly, I believe he was allowed to keep stake in all 34 entities. So he's still getting rich no matter what choice or company you buy from. It all still seemingly goes to the same place. They just split it up. I don't fully understand if that's really all that much better. But one of the companies that came out of it is ExxonMobil. And yeah, he was a strong believer in social Darwinism, which is survival of the fittest. So he made like these very shady, illegal back channel deals with the railroad, like basically railroad cartel, and would basically not allow the smaller oil well owners to, like, they would be denied the right to use the railroad to ship their product, and basically they just cut them out until they all just went under, because he would just offer to acquire them and merge, so buy them out. So yeah, instead of being able to own and operate your own business and be given a fair chance to compete, all these illegal business practices is how Rockefeller really became the first billionaire, all in the name of just lowering the price a little bit. There's comparisons to like the mom and pop shops all going away with Walmart. Everybody loves the convenience and stuff, but all those family-run businesses that have been around for generations went away. Same people who were apparently your neighbors in these small towns just lose their job, lose their livelihood. Remember what I said earlier. There's a pattern of this stuff happening throughout the last 100 and something years. The money's not going to the people to help the people advance and become more well-rounded and have more skills that they can use to sustain themselves and produce income. They're basically leading us to having to rely on a few wealthy individuals that make money off of everything and machines. That's the direction that we're trending, willingly so. So, yeah, I was talking about Rockefeller. That's how he came to become the first billionaire. But then, conveniently, when you become the first billionaire, you now have power, influence, and say on everything that happens moving forward. Like, you now have your family ingrained in the fabric of the country, and now you have vice president in the White House, and he was apparently the one, the Rockefeller Commission demanded that we uncover this stuff about MK Ultra. Like I said, they just changed the name and continued doing what they're doing. I think they changed it to something apricot or something like that. So, like, what do they really care? Nothing ever ends up happening after the fact. It's the same thing with journalism. When they print an ad, a front page, huge ad, and then when it ends up that they have to correct it, sometimes they don't even, but if they do, it's back page and fine print. Like, it's first impression. I can speak from experience when people have an opinion and a first impression of something, it's really hard to get them to see the truth and change the way they feel about things. But anyway, MK Ultra was, they were in like 80 institutions, military, like colleges, university, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies, experimenting with LSD, how it, affects us and the brain, and then electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, which is a huge violation of human rights that they were committing on people without their knowledge. So, real quick, there's some people, I see a lot of reasons that make me believe this isn't a far-fetched idea, that this could be some truth to this. But, peace, love, anti-war, Vietnam stuff in the 60s. There's like a real movement happening with the hippies. The vibrations were changing. The frequency was getting higher, which goes against everything that the people in charge want. So there was some speculation that Charles Manson actually was like a CIA trained operative, and the cult, the family that later went on to kill, Shannon Tate and I think 8 or 9 other people in 1971, I believe. Charles Manson never actually took the LSD or any of the mind-altering substances. That, in fact, he was doing the exact same thing that MK Ultra was doing, and basically like brainwashing and torturing or programming the minds of the family to create this horrible result. Them, like, basically him being able to control them and have them commit these crimes, which ultimately was what ended the whole hippie movement, peace, love, and harmony, because these were free spirits. They were, to the everyday man, there was no difference between them and whatever, peace, love, and happiness really means, like murder. That's what they ultimately made people believe it meant to be a hippie. So all of a sudden, that movement died because the family was associated with being hippies. So now, like, being a hippie, not a good thing. Time to move on and forget that dream. But there is a lot of actual documented, like, things that match up. There was, in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, there was a free clinic that had a doctor who had ties to MK Ultra. That's where he was stationed. And Charles Manson absolutely lived in San Francisco and 100% went to this clinic on several occasions and met with the people there. And then next thing you know, he was in Los Angeles and was the cult leader, and the murders happened. Now, I'm not saying that, I don't know that to be 100% a true thing that happened. I really don't know. But at this stage, where there's smoke, I tend to recognize there's usually fire. It's not the craziest thing I've ever heard. It's exactly the type of thinking, just like the Banana Republic. The levels that these people are willing to go to operate undetected and think that they, it's diabolical, like the extent that they go through to get things that they want. It comes out time and time again, years later, that this stuff happens, but we don't care about the history. We're just so sure that it's still not happening. Again, not sure why. So, I'm not going to talk too much about Carnegie. I don't really know. I know he was like a huge philanthropist and Carnegie Mellon and all that stuff. I don't know. I remember watching something on him, but I can't remember what my takeaway about him, if he was as ruthless and money motivated as the other ones. Like, I know he was hugely into philanthropy and being philanthropic later in life, but I don't know. I don't have a read on whether or not that was to play a part and cover his bad behavior, or if that was genuine. I will have to re-explore him and see what my take is on him. But I want to end with, I actually have a lot more, but I will wrap it up after this because this kind of is a good place to end. So, I talked about that I went to Penn State Altoona and how that town was one of the towns that was just left to die after the railroad left and industry left, and just riddled with drugs, and Who knows if he'll ever recover. It's middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. But there's a guy that came out of Altoona named Harry Aslinger. He was the first department head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which came to be in 1930, he was the active head of that department from 1930 to 1962. Now, he never, earlier on in his career, had any issue with, and I don't have, I don't smoke weed or anything. I don't have a strong, fight for legalization of weed or anything. Again, when it comes to that, it's just do you. I don't really care. But he had no issue with weed. He was a big prohibition guy. He was on the Prohibition Task Force, and basically when Prohibition was getting revoked, that organization, that unit, had no purpose anymore. So out of self-preservation, all of a sudden, he had to change his stance on certain narcotics, specifically weed, and talk about how much of a threat it is to this country, and specifically target, he seemed like he was just a big-time racist. He targeted black jazz clubs. There's an artist called Billie Holiday who was got wrapped up in everything. I think I forget the extent of the story, but I know it didn't end well for him. But long story short, he changed his stance 100% on weed and somehow convinced the government that we needed to crack down on marijuana, and we really need war on drugs. We need a task force, a department for this. So they created Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which he just so happened to get to lead, really just for self-preservation purposes, because he didn't have a role anymore because Prohibition was going away. That was the fight that he was fighting. When that changed, he changed his stance on marijuana, and let's say that what's the real reason that marijuana was banned, not has anything to do with anybody caring about if it's good or bad for people. I've already talked about cigarettes, and obviously you can make advertising campaigns and stage those to sell that product. So to think that anybody actually cares what's good for us and bad for us is outrageous. Once again, it's just money, self-preservation. Harry Anslinger was the department head from 1930 to 1962, spanning 5 presidents over 3 decades. Not a good man. Big-time racist who basically didn't have a strong opinion on something. He's willing to flip-flop and stuff for self-preservation. And the reason that they wanted to target weed in the first place was not because of the health concerns or what it did to people, because, obviously weed doesn't make people get more aggressive. It just had to do with simple hemp production, how hemp was potentially going to be used as a alternative for paper products. And William Randolph Hearst, who just happened to own like 1 million newspapers and had production of paper, collaborated with Harry Anslinger to create a yellow journalism campaign and to make reefer madness that made the everyday people think that like marijuana is this thing that's going to turn people into absolute lunatics. It was just a fear campaign, scare tactics, yellow journalism, just so Harry Anslinger could create a department within the government and self-preserve his own job that he ended up being in office in that role for 30-something years and had influence and sway over decision makings of 5 different presidents in some of the choices that they made when it comes to this stuff. And it was all based on helping certain men in high positions control an industry. So with him in the government and Hearst, who owned he started in San Francisco with the Examiner, which I find funny because San Francisco was the first drug laws back in the late 1800s where they just decided to target Chinese and go after them for opium, not because it had anything to do with drugs again. It was, they didn't like that the Chinese workers were willing to work harder and for the same price or cheaper. So what did they do? They already knew that the establishments existed, that they were like the opium dens and stuff. So they just basically targeted. They made a law, targeted this demographic, and set them up and arrested them so that the white people, could just have jobs and not have to compete. That's how business is done throughout the centuries. But yeah, with the legalizing weed, and really where the war on drugs all started was with this one man who just wanted a job. And then William Randolph Hearst, who, I mean, this guy, when we talk about influencing in a negative way the beliefs of generations, when we have the internet and things like that now, we have so much more information at our fingertips to actually be able to learn about this stuff. When we go back to these times, We have to remember, there's a lot of people who just believed that what you read in the newspaper was the way that it was. These people had tremendous power and influence and sway. But it's not even just then. Like, still today, the belief and the trust that people put into certain outlets where they get their information. I watch these things, and it's so evidently clear to me that the same exact manipulation and propaganda and yellow journalism that has occurred for 100 and something years is still alive and well. We should know so much better at this stage, with all that we have, how to decipher what has some truth to it and what is just sensationalized nonsense. There's so much that is just being shoved down our throats. Like, put on YouTube Kids and watch what it actually is that the young kids, like, I have to explain to Riley that they're just sponsored commercials with the people that you know. Like, these content creators just running a 15 or 20-minute ad, getting parents to spend money on American Girl dolls or whatever it is, because they're advertising to kids that they just see their people that they like playing with this stuff. And it's just like, it's just, I'm just for truth. And so many people just don't understand that this stuff is happening. Like, William Randolph, like, let me just explain to you a little bit more about William Randolph Hearst. So, yeah, he started in San Francisco, which maybe another day this week, I'm beginning to notice some weird connections to shady things that all begin in San Francisco. I would need to look into that a little bit more, but I started recognizing, like, it's just weird coincidences, and I don't believe in coincidences, so I'm curious to see what I find. But yeah, I mean, William Randolph Hearst is like the king of yellow journalism and sensationalism. So he started the New York Journal, and he was up against Joseph Pulitzer, which you might recognize the last name, you know, the Pulitzer Prize. So this guy, Pulitzer, actually was trying to run an honest newspaper, run the stories, you know, but Hearst wanted to sell papers. He actually came from racy tabloids before trying to make a legit paper in New York. But he was willing to basically do anything to outsell Pulitzer, including, and I talked yesterday, so here's the connection. I talked about how, like, it was so clearly evident to the person, the ambassador who was actually in Germany, how dangerous the Nazi Party was, and, like, all the signs were there leading up to what happened World War II. But William Randolph Hearst, part of the selling the U.S. people that none of that was happening. He had favorable coverage of the Nazi Party because they were willing to pay him money for him to do so. So, as things are escalating in Germany, in America, William Randolph Hearst is applauding Hitler and the Nazi Party, making the nation not think that anything was going on. Did William Randolph Hearst care? No, he was getting paid for the ads. So what difference is it to him who it is that he's selling them to? This guy also gets elected 2 times to the House of Representatives. That's a guy we want making decisions for our country. Yeah, he didn't just do it with World War II. Even more famously, Spanish-American War, he basically was the reason that it happened in the first place. The rumor, propaganda, sensationalism, which was like all full of errors and not factual at all, basically led to like American general population being outraged towards Spain, having to do with the Cuban Revolution and the sinking of the Maine, which was a U.S., I think it was a U.S. ship, but I remember I did a deep dive into that story a long time ago. I just briefly wrote down some notes today on him. But yeah, it's a really bad story that shows just how nobody is regulating these people. They're allowed to run wild and do what they want. And there's just case after case of a guy who was elected to 2 times the House of Representatives, who has the worst business ethics and moral compass. Like, it's like the guy is literally in gold we trust. Like, whatever, as long as he's getting paid and selling papers, just like so many others who run these companies and are in our government, they don't care as long as they're getting paid. I can do this forever and come up with more examples. Literally forever. It's just a matter of if you are willing to accept truth or not. Most people just don't want to actually look at the cold, hard, honest truth because it makes them uncomfortable that this is the world we live in. But I would rather know exactly the world and try to change it for the better than just pretend that it's not happening. So, yeah, I mean, this guy, made money with these newspapers all over the country, printing whatever he wanted to print. I mean, it still, Hearst Corporation media conglomerate still exists today with newspapers, TV, magazines. They still own Cosmo and Esquire and 50% of A&E and 20% of Disney. Yeah, I'll remind you that the entire war on drugs and reefer madness and all the propaganda for marijuana was all just fabricated and made up because he was a major investor in paper milling and wanted to ban hemp. Nothing to do with smoking the actual marijuana. Just didn't want competition for his investment. Pretty plain and simple. Pretty much the same stuff that goes on every day, still today. Pretty obviously, if anybody just wants to pay attention or fight against it, it's just pattern recognition and literally the same playbook. Repeat it. History repeating itself. It's not just a saying. These people, like I said, they have zero empathy. Like narcissism and other mental disorders is the most dangerous thing to our society. Because they do not have empathy for anybody else. I need that sink into people. If somebody lacks empathy and is in a powerful position, which they tend to be in, it kind of comes with the deal. Most are very successful, but just like Rockefeller and Hearst and all the other billionaires and families that we still know today, they're successful because they're literally willing to do anything to fill their pockets. They lack empathy for anybody else. It's survival of the fittest, like disregarding the laws, the antitrust laws, doing illegal deals, but just getting slap on the wrist and having to break up his company into smaller ones that he could still profit off of. None of that actually means anything. These people who disregard rules and laws do whatever they want because they don't think they're ever going to get caught because nobody cares. And if they do, they just pay them off. It's the same thing over and over again everywhere. But I guess I'm the only one not willing to... Nobody even approaches me with this type of stuff because they already know that that's just not going to cross certain lines. But apparently, I'm one of the few out there that have some sort of principles and morals when it comes to this stuff. Because I always knew it existed. But the things that have gone on in my personal life, really opened it up to a whole new level of this is... I didn't know about mental illness until a few years ago on this level that I know about it now. I've spent so much time living it, understanding a decade worth of living amongst people that have this thing, and now knowing what they were actually doing was even worse than I just picked up on myself. there are no limits or things they're not willing to do. And you don't have to do one thing to them. You can be good to them, and they will still want to destroy you simply because they think they can. And they're going to benefit financially from it. If they can benefit financially, just like Hearst and Rockefeller, they'll just do what they want, just break the rules. These are the people running a fair amount of our country. Morally inept. Not for the people. We need to wake up. So that's the lesson for today. Yeah, I enjoy talking much more about the things I talked about last week, the positive influences who actually tried to make a difference. This stuff definitely takes a lot for me to stay balanced and calm when I'm talking about, because to me it's as clear as day that this is the world we live in, and that just the everyday man is getting absolutely cheated out of truth and opportunities and just the freedom to make their own decisions with the actual information without being manipulated and lied to, and have everything just put a spin on everything to make you believe, just to instill fear and to keep people trapped in their same mundane lives where they get distracted by everything and they have to wait in these lines at the DMV. All of a sudden they are getting, in Pennsylvania, I have the ID from Florida that is the one with the hologram. Apparently you can't fly now with just the normal Pennsylvania ID. So if you don't have a passport, you have to run to the DMV and get an ID and pay $70. And if you don't, you're trapped. You can't fly. Why is that not free? Why is it taking this long to switch over? And don't people pay taxes for? Is that not part of the state tax? Isn't that a state-run? I don't understand. Am I missing something? They just get to switch that stuff and then force people to have to go waste their time and spend their money just for the right to travel within their own country. And they already pay taxes for, I thought, things just like this. Am I wrong? If I am, please let me know. I haven't done any research on this and know nothing truly about it. I'm just saying, everything I said, I think, makes logical sense. And I was under the impression when you live in the state and pay that state tax and all these, like, doesn't that go to those things? And why are they so behind with it in the first place? Why is the U.S. government and state governments and everything not on the same page? Like, none of it actually makes any sense. It's a big waste of time. It's just a distraction, waste people's time and spend people's money. There's a better way for all of this stuff. It's not as hard as they want you to think it is. They want to keep things the way that they are because they are getting paid money. They are financially benefiting for keeping the things the way that they are. It's that simple. We don't have a shortage. There's no money problem that exists. It's the distribution of money and how people earn it. That's the problem. You'd be surprised how abundant this world is when we don't just willingly let a select few people control everything about our lives and get rich off of it by lying to us. You just need to see it and be willing to actually see the value in. People fear change, I understand. But change is a necessary part of life. And it's just a mindset. You go into it positively, the change is going to be positive. It's just a mindset. So I will be back on tomorrow with another lesson. I haven't really thought about what the topic will be, but it'll be along the same lines as last night and tonight, talking about just the blatant hypocrisy and flaws that appear and exist not only now, but throughout time in all different aspects of our lives, just riddled with this type of stuff that we don't seem to have any desire to change for the better. But I'm still going to keep trying. So see you guys tomorrow night. Love you all.